All right, guys, welcome back to Within Tolerance. This is episode 26, and me and Dylan are joined by Andrew Henry from Henry Holsters. And I know both Dylan and I are extremely excited to have you on, Andrew. And we've got a bunch of cool questions for you. And I know a lot of the listeners are curious to hear kind of your background. So let's just get into it. So, how did you get into machining? And then how did you kind of start your company?
So I started my company before I got into machining. And thank you guys very much for having me on. I'm excited to be here on Within Tolerance. Um, my background is as a musician. So I grew up studying violin. I went to college for classical music. I have a degree in viola performance and a degree in violin making. And so I'd grown up with a hands-on woodworking background. I'd been around shop and tools, and I enjoyed making things. And I started making holsters after I launched my first company, and it completely failed. So when I was just finishing up school, around 2006, 2007, I tried to launch a company building custom electric guitars and basses. And I basically borrowed some money from a friend of mine, tooled up a small wood shop, and then launched that business right into the teeth of the recession. And it never took off. It didn't even like get airborne and then crash and burn. I could never get it going. I had a day job, but I was trying to start that company on the side. And that's actually where the origin of my logo, the script lowercase h, came from my guitar designs. And a lot of the equipment that's in my shop, bandsaws, sanders, dust collectors, other things that are currently in use in the holster shop, originated in that small wood shop that I set up in the basement of my house with my college roommates when I was finishing grad school. And so that was kind of there was a pivot at a certain point. It was obvious that business was not going to take off. Custom guitars are a fairly time consuming per item kind of business. And unless you have commissions, making expensive, highly detailed stuff on spec and then going out and hoping to sell it somewhere is a great way to end up taking half of your desired price out of desperation and just taking losses. So I got into holster making at that time because I had the little shop, and a friend of mine came over. He and I both owned some handguns, and he had gotten a holster from another company in Missouri, and he brought it over and showed it to me, and it was made out of Kydex and leather, and he liked some things about it but didn't like others. And so he and I took that holster and messed around with it and made some changes to it, and then I said, compared to making violins or making guitars, this plastic is pretty easy to work with. It's fairly forgiving. You can reheat it. You can mold it by hand. And so I decided to order some up and play around with it and had a really fun time with it. I enjoyed working with it. It was a forgiving material. It was fun to make stuff. And that's how I started. In late 2008, early 2009, I started making some holsters, mostly for friends. And then by late 2009, I was selling holsters occasionally, not a lot. And then it was a steady part-time job from 2010 on, and I went full-time in my shop in 2016.
Wow, that's awesome. So what path did you take into machining? I know I haven't seen I don't think a picture of it specifically, but I've seen in the back of some of your videos you have like a small CNC router style machine.
I used to. I don't anymore. So my path into CNC machining was I was interested in it because I had seen applications in guitar making. And I wanted to find a way, because a lot of guitar shops, all the way back to the classic Gibson, Fender, a lot of the well-known brands that make a lot of electrics, tons of their stuff was just done with pin routers and overlay templates. And I wasn't really interested in going that route. I had made my first guitars using router tables, and I didn't like it. It was always kind of sketchy. Stuff would occasionally blow up and splinter and go flying. It was just, I didn't like it. And so I really wanted to have the precision of CNC for slotting fretboards, cutting neck pockets, inlaying bridge bases, all the different things, to be able to lay it out in CAD and then have guitar bodies come out identically. Everything measured, everything placed, everything located correctly was incredibly attractive to me. So that I wanted to get into routers, and I didn't even know what a mill was until about 2013. And then I spent some time in a friend's shop, and he had a Haas VF3. And that really opened my eyes to, like, compared to a router, fairly big iron. Like, not a real big table, but a ton of mass, auto tool changer, coolant, all that stuff I was totally unfamiliar with. And so I bought my first CNC in 2014. I saved up some money, and I actually got a little micro loan from basically a student project at the local Big Ten university. I live in Bloomington, so Indiana University, IU, Big Red, is very close to me. And so I ended up working with a project for some students in the business school where they sourced some funding and were trying to make 2 or 3 micro loans, a couple $1,000s each, to small local startups. So they lent me a couple $1,000s and helped me buy my first little 24 by 24 inch desktop CNC router. And I had no prior training, no experience, nothing. Got it, put it on the floor of my shop, and was like, okay, now what?
So, Andrew, how old were you about this time?
I'm 35, so
Okay.
I bought that machine just a couple years ago, and it's been an aggressive upward learning curve since then, but
Yeah,
super
no
fun.
joke.
And I actually
Yeah.
never ended up making guitars on that machine. I found that it was, it didn't have a tool changer. It was an open enclosure. It was, it was a fairly inexpensive little 2424 router, and the company I bought it from went out of business 6 months after I got
Oh,
it.
shoot.
So I had saved up money. I was like, I'm gonna buy a new machine, so I've got support, so I've got warranty, so I can get parts. And then that company dropped off the face of the earth.
Oh no.
I'd been looking I've looked at CamMaster, ShopSaber, and K2 CNC, and I decided to go with K2 CNC. And CamMaster and ShopSaber are still around, and K2 CNC is long gone.
Oh jeez.
I picked it partly because another guitar maker who I knew, Kerry Nordstrand from Nordstrand Guitars, had an early K2 machine in his shop that he'd used for years and years and liked. And I talked to him about it, and he said it had worked really well for him. So I had a personal recommendation from a guitar maker whose opinion I valued for that machine. But apparently they had some problems on the business end and then just stopped answering the phone, and their website went down and emails started bouncing back, and I was on my own.
Oh boy.
So
So was that
that was an
like
adventure.
was that a stepper driven type of CNC router? Like was it fairly off the shelf parts that you could at least service yourself, or were you, I mean, DOA if anything went out?
I am not especially mechanically apt, actually. I'm good with my hands, but I'm not good at math, and I've often struggled with electrical theory. Like people who can service their own mills, like I don't. I'm not comfortable doing that. I don't think that way in some ways. And so if that machine had gone down, I'm not sure what I would have done. I probably would have hopped on some router forums and spent a bunch of time asking around. There was a whole small community of people who all got hung out to drive by K2 at the same time, and it was an active forum topic. Guys were like, "Hey, what happened to K2?" And so there were at least other owners who could have helped with my machine. Thankfully, it didn't come to that. But yeah, it was a fairly basic. It had ball screws on all axes, so it wasn't using belt drives or anything. That was part of the reason I picked it. It was a little bit more robust. But it helped me buy my first brother, so I consider it a good investment.
Totally. So I guess let's talk about what you do at Henry Holsters. You've got, a few product lines. And what specifically do you make? I mean, obviously you make holsters, but you've got some other product stuff out there.
So we're primarily a plastic machining shop, and our main industry is gun holsters. Most of our business is OEM and wholesale. We make a lot of private label stuff. So I supply holsters for a bunch of other brands that my name doesn't go on. And that's the majority of our current business. We're basically a wholesaler. And that means that I get to work on a lot of behind the scenes, interesting design stuff, get my hands in a lot of fun projects, and be the backline that helps other brands and companies grow and be able to scale their production, because holsters as an industry, there's no middle. There are some really big companies, and then there are thousands of small companies, and there isn't a lot in between. So you've got to go big or go home. I've not gone big yet, in a sense, but like I'm talking about companies like Safariland, Blade Tech, Blackhawk, companies that are doing tens of millions of dollars in revenue a year and do things like service major Department of Defense contracts and supply holsters to the NYPD and the LAPD. I'm not at that scale. That's far beyond my production capacity. But holsters as an industry locally is dominated by small shops where the guys are doing all the work by hand and are probably making $5,000 to $25,000 worth of holsters a year. It's a cottage industry because the bar to entry is pretty low. You don't have to have a lot of fancy machinery to work with Kydex and make holsters. And so I'm in a funny place in that I'm in two ponds at once. Among machinists, I'm an absolute novice. Among holster makers, I'm relatively experienced because I've been making holsters for 10 years now, and my business has grown, and I've been able to design a lot of things that have been adopted by other companies. But among machinists, I'm a babe in the woods. And so when I talk to other guys who own their own shops, when I talk to guys who are doing 5-axis machining and doing lights out automation with horizontals and multi-cell stuff, I'm just beside myself. It's so cool, but it's so far beyond me that it makes my head hurt.
Well, you never know. A lot of the videos you put out, and like the fact that you now have two brothers, like, I mean, that your inexperience or self-proclaimed inexperience is doesn't seem like that at all.
Well, it's like this is the advantage and the disadvantage of being self-taught. There are many times when I wish I'd had 2 years to go be an apprentice in somebody else's shop, just a job shop, and it had to work with stainless and alloys and do lathe work and maybe do some 5-axis and play around with Mastercam and do a lot of the things that job shop guys tend to have in their backgrounds. Like, one of my friends went to Vincennes University and studied 5-axis machining and then graduated and opened his own Swiss shop after having worked in another Swiss shop for a few years. And he had a ton of relevant experience. And so he was getting into a game he already understood. I got into this game without understanding it and just decided that I was going to gut it out and figure it out and stay up as late at night as I needed to and read what I needed to and watch what I needed to and ask questions of whoever would answer my questions and then just sit down and figure it out. But there've been a lot of weird hiccups along the way. Like, I bought my first brother. I had it spec'd out with Renishaw probing, and I don't think I used that probe for 6 months because I could not wrap my mind around all the subroutine calls and the variables and everything that was in the Renishaw programs that came loaded on the machine. Mm-hmm. I just didn't understand them, and I was scared of messing with them because I didn't understand the syntax. Like, if I change this, what will happen? And so I just didn't use it. Like, I was edge finding with a tape measure for a while. But that's a function of the kinds of things that I make. Currently, almost everything we make is palletized. Everything runs off standardized work coordinate systems. Very few things we make have more than one op. Almost all of our holster products are formed out of plastic sheet, and then they drop onto a fixture on the CNC and are held in place with a combination of hold-down clamps or vacuum or magnets or a combination. And then they're trimmed and engraved and drilled in a single op and they're done. And so all the complexity of understanding setups and datum planes and how to orient a part through multiple ops and keep track of true position and do all those things, it doesn't exist in my world, really. Most of what I do doesn't require any of that. And so I haven't really spent a lot of time learning how to do it, which means every once in a while when I have to do parts that have 4 or 5 ops and involve multiple setups and things, the level of comfort that I have with that kind of work is very, very low. So I go very, very slow. I double, triple check everything, and it stresses me out to run those kind of parts just because it's outside my lane.
Totally. Yeah, well, that makes sense.
Like, I had a chance to quote some parts for another shop one time, and I looked at this part and I'm like, that's going to be at least like 7 ops. Like, I can't. It was this weird angular part that had bores on multiple faces, and I looked at it and I was like, I don't know. I have no idea how to quote this part. I ended up just saying, thank you for giving me the chance, but I can't do this because I didn't have a clue how to start approaching it.
Yeah, that's fair. So
and that just tells me that I need 5 axes, apparently. Just done in one with tabs and snap it off.
Yeah, then it's not a problem, right?
Yeah.
So let's step back measure and you'll get it close.
Now, I'll have you know, I use a Starrett tape measure.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
I mean, that's tense accuracy all day.
Yeah.
tenths of a foot.
Yeah. So what made you choose your brother? Let's step back a little bit. I mean, going from a CNC router to any kind of mill is a big step, and like not knowing anything about machining, brother seems like kind of an odd choice. I mean, I guess you were looking for low cycle times, but like, you had experience with a VF3 or a Haas, like that seems like it's kind of the go-to for a lot of people when they're stepping into it.
When I decided I wanted to move up from the router, the thing that was driving that was I really wanted an ATC, and I wanted the ability to be able to make molds for holster making out of aluminum. And so at that point, I decided I wanted to get a mill, and my main limitation was space. So I live out in the sticks in the middle of nowhere. And that's the reason I barely use Fusion 360, because my internet connection is so horrible that I can't use cloud software. Like it just doesn't work for me out where I am. And so I had a pole barn, and there were only a handful of machines that I looked at that I could get into the pole barn without either taking out a wall or having to cut out part of the header. And it was a rental property, and so I couldn't cut out part of the header. And so I was looking, like I looked at a Haas, VF1, VF2. I looked a little bit at Fanuc robo drills. I'd spent a little bit of time looking at Fanuc controls in another shop, and it made my brain short out. I hated it from the first glance of somebody clicking through menus and showing me how they did some setup things on the machine. I hated it. And so I also looked at Herco, because Herco is headquartered in Indianapolis. It's not very far from me, a little over an hour. And so I looked at I think a VM5i and a VM10i. And the things I really liked about the Brother were I liked the tool changer style, all mechanical, no sidearm, no side carousel, nothing. I really didn't like umbrella tool changers. I'd looked at them and I was like, I don't really dig this. And I didn't have any particular reason not to, but if I didn't have any investment, I wasn't already committed to Haas, or I wasn't already committed to Fanuc, I didn't have a shop of existing stuff, I really was picking out of thin air what things I wanted. And so Herco was all about their conversational. I program absolutely nothing in conversational. We don't do any plate work. It wasn't relevant to me. I'm like, I'm not really going to be doing conversational. And so their big, the thing that their sales guy was really trying to hype me on just didn't connect with what I wanted to do. And so I didn't doubt that it works great, but I wasn't going to use it. And so it didn't sell me on that. When I looked at Brother, the other thing was no augers. And I knew I was going to be doing dry machining, and I was going to be switching back and forth between wet machining and dry machining. And I wanted a fairly simple machine on the inside where I could just sweep all my dry chips out, which is what we do. So anytime I'm dry machining, I have bins that I've cut down that go behind the machine right by the chutes. And then I've made some tools that fit down those little ways on the sides, and we just push the chips out. So the operator from the front of the machine can just grab a broom, sweep all the loose chips down, and then push them out into the bins in the back, and then we just take them outside and throw them away. So really, really simple.
That makes it really easy. Yeah.
And I could get a Brother into my space without having to disassemble any part of it. You just lower the Z-axis, disconnect that whole cable tree that lifts up, and lay that flat, and we could skate the thing in. We really cleared by like 3/4 of an inch when we brought the first machine in. So I went to Yamazin, which was about an hour and a half from me, a couple times, looked at the machines. I liked them. The service tech lived not that far from me, and he was very helpful. And so there were a number of things that just made me feel a little better about it. And they were very interested in what I was trying to do. And so it felt like a good fit, and I went for it, and I've really enjoyed it. A lot of things about the Brother, aside from the cancel with saving changes menu button, a lot of things about Brother make sense to me. It's just the controls made sense, the layout made sense. I know that there are some things that we can't do in MDI mode that other guys coming from robo drills go, why can't you do this in MDI mode? You can't run like a program in MDI mode. No, I can. I use MDI mode basically just to change tools or jump to preset work coordinate zeros on the table. That's all I do with MDI.
Right.
But
Yeah.
because I was starting completely fresh with no prior experience, no prior commitment to any system, um, I decided to go with brother. And after the first one I had for 2 years, and it worked really well for me, I had an opportunity to snap up a second one because apparently somebody else had ordered one really stripped down, grease only, no wash down nozzles on the sides, no wiring for fourth axis, no plumbing for through spindle coolant, the small coolant tray, literally the most basic options possible. Somebody had ordered that machine and had gotten delivered in Chicago, and then the buyer backed out. I don't know what the deal was with that. So my local Yamazon office called me and said, hey, we know you're doing a lot of dry machining on your current machine. Do you have use for a machine that's kind of optimal for dedicated dry machining? And I'm like, yeah, I could use that. And that allowed me to take all the mold making and keep it on my original machine and then invest more in like a Pearson mini pallet system and some other stuff to make that workflow smoother. And then take all the plastic work, all the dry machining, all the prototyping over to a second machine and be able to separate out the tool libraries. So I've got all my plastic cutters, my O flutes, all my Onsrud stuff, and keep that separate so I don't have to be changing out Destiny tool and Swift carb and putting in Onsrud and all this stuff throughout the day as I change back and forth between parts. It also allowed me to have a machine for my first employee to run. And so everything was palletized, everything was set. I did the programming, everything was marked on the fixture, so you could just drop a fixture on, pull up a program number, load the part, and run it. So that's been a great fit for us.
That's great. So you mentioned in the beginning when we were talking about the brother that you wanted to do aluminum molds, but looking at your Instagram feed, it seems like a lot of your molds now are Delrin or something, some other hard plastic.
So we do a couple of different things. Production molds are often aluminum, just for
Okay.
durability and flatness, but we do a lot of prototyping, and we're very much a high mix, low volume, on demand manufacturing kind of shop. So I don't sit down and run 2,000 of something and then warehouse it in bins. Almost all the companies we make stuff for will put in a PO and we turn around their parts as quickly as possible. And oftentimes the volumes are low, like 50 of something or 100 of something. And so whenever we're making a new part or we're designing things, almost all the prototype molds are machined out of plastic, either acetyl or HDPE, depending on how many cycles I think I'll need to get out of the forming mold. If I'm just trying an idea out, and we do a lot of manual iterative design where I CAD something up, I get my specs close using numbers that I know are fairly relevant, and then we machine a test copy and then make a holster off it because the design process is a little backwards in the sense that I never actually model up the physical products. The holsters are never drawn. Everything is derived from the mold side forward. So the mold is based on the measurements of the firearm plus some tolerances for clearance because the gun has to be able to slide in and out of the holster. And then I literally just imagine the holster laid on top of the mold, but all the tolerancing is done on the inside planes where the mold interfaces with the Kydex holster that lays over it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, totally.
So it's different than injection molding. I'm not creating the object first and then cutting it into or extruding it into a mold to make it. I'm designing the mold first. And so the holster at the end of the process tells the truth. I can have all the numbers and figure them out as best as I can in advance, but firearms are a weird thing and they have their own manufacturing tolerances. Some companies are better than others about maintaining good tolerances. Sig Sauer is notoriously awful. Holster makers hate certain models of Sig Sauer pistol because there were as many as 5 or 6 different specs for the pistol under a single model name, and they're not differentiated in any way. And they're different enough in their external dimensions that they're not cross compatible in a holster. It's like, Sig, what are you doing? Who is your machinist where I can get 2 guns with the same model designation and they'll be different in width by 40 thousandths or 50 thousandths of an inch? That's
Wow,
huge.
that's giant.
And it's a lot of contract machining, and they, it just, who knows? We were the least of their concerns. Gun companies don't really think about holster makers. They just think, oh yeah, well, if they want to sell holsters, they'll have to make the holsters fit our guns. So we just make our gun the way we want, and the holster makers figure it out down the road. What's been nice is in the past few years, as I've been able to build more of a business and establish more of a reputation, the opportunity to work with firearms companies earlier on in their process, not necessarily before release, well, not before designs are done, but at least prior to release, so I don't have a gun suddenly appear on the market and have the brands that I support say, we need holsters for this gun right away, and then find out that there's some weird feature on the gun that makes designing a holster for it a pain. It's happened occasionally, but it happens less and less these days, which is nice.
So how do you go about that design and iteration process? Like, do you have to have? I would imagine you don't have to have a functional firearm to test fit everything. Are there places that produce, fit copies, or like how do you work around that?
So we keep a live firearm on hand for everything we make.
Oh wow.
And that's just because for ongoing QC, I have to be able to demonstrate that an actual production firearm, not a replica, not a copy that I made to certain measurements, but like the actual production thing with a serial number made by the company, that it fits safely and securely in the holsters that we produce on an ongoing basis for that model. It also is important because when companies make revisions and their spec on the gun changes, I need to have live examples of the different generations of the firearm so I can compare key measurements and figure out where I need to adjust my tolerances to get it to fit across as many variants of the model as possible. And in some cases, that means that we buy firearms. In some cases, it means that we are loaned firearms by the manufacturer until we get the mold work done, and then we return the firearms. And if we decide to support that model on an ongoing basis, then we buy a copy to keep on hand. It varies. It used to be that a lot of holster makers just use plastic cast replicas. There's a company called Rings Blue Guns, and you'll see blue guns. They're just injection molded rubber police training replicas. And that's what I used when I started. When I began making holsters, everything I was making was formed off these rubber guns. But they are horribly dimensionally inaccurate and inconsistent. You could buy 5 copies of the exact same thing, and the specs will vary so widely that you can't use any one of them as a definitive mold. You always ended up like adding tape and sanding part of it and putting some epoxy and JB Weld in to fill in this gap, and it was a total crapshoot, and it couldn't scale. And so going to CNC for all the mold making meant that I could actually scale my business and could actually scale the production. If I needed to speed up, I could make 4 or 8 copies of a mold and have them be completely consistent, and then automate the forming process and actually start producing some real volume.
Totally, yeah. So, I mean, I guess that kind of leads into one of our questions, which was, what makes your holsters different from other on the market? And it sounds like your holsters are part of the market, whether it's under your brand or others. But there's like you said, it's a big cottage industry. What makes yours different? I mean, I think that having live firearms is definitely a big plus. Like, you're clearly checking them and all that.
There, 2 years ago, there were fewer shops who had the capabilities that we have. The industry has accelerated, and as is usually the case, anytime you have an industry where there are thousands of cottage players, gradually some of those guys will rise to the top and will start making investments in equipment and will start buying CNCs and will start designing their own molds. And so the main features that set my personal brand of holsters apart are a fairly limited range of models that have very intentionally designed features for a specific style of carry. The analogy I use is we're making English sports cars, in that they don't have power windows, they don't even have a radio. All it is a chassis, an engine, it just drives. That's what it's for. And so we don't do a lot of flashy stuff. I don't offer any colors. We don't do custom fancy prints or anything exotic. Everything is in stock. So we ship same day or next day. That's fairly unusual for a holster company our size. And everything is purpose-built for performance, which means we don't have the sexiest holsters. They're not flashy, but they work really, really well. And you can order one today and have it in your hand in 2 or 3 days.
Okay, that's great. So, speaking of your, press and all that stuff, So you have, besides your holsters, the Swift press. I've seen you do ashtrays. I think they were the Morpheus ashtrays, if that's correct.
Yeah, that was more of a learning experiment. I don't make the Morpheus trays anymore. I was playing around. I'd seen some other guys. I think Tyson Lamb makes golf putters. I'd seen some other guys playing around with using um, toolpaths like Morph Spiral and then playing with stock to leave to essentially engrave organic shapes into a solid object without actually having to draw that stuff in. Just playing with the toolpaths to generate textures in machined parts. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, totally.
And so I made the first Morpheus trays. I made like a radial one, and I made a concentric spiral one, and I made a morph spiral one. And I was just playing around with different toolpaths in Inventor. I made this basic cigar tray because I wanted to have some to give as gifts to people, and then made a bunch of different versions of it and ended up liking the morphed spiral version. And so I called it the Morpheus tray and made, probably 70 or 80 of them, and then gradually sold them off and haven't made them since. It was more of a chance to play around and learn things about the cam, and then also have a useful product at the end that I could give away or sell and have fun with. I also used to be more of a cigar and pipe guy, and I'm not anymore, so I don't have any use for it myself.
That's fair. So what about the Swift press? What is it, and is that still a product line of yours, or?
It is still a product line. I actually just bought some more material so I can revamp and do Swift Press Fixturing 3.0 because I need to make it a much easier, faster setup with fewer ops. So the Swift Press is essentially a small, non-membrane vacuum former. So 10 years ago, only big holster companies were doing injection molding and vacuum forming. Everybody else was forming holsters using high temperature neoprene foam and these replica rubber guns. So you heat up your sheet plastic till it's floppy, you put oven mitts on, essentially, you wrap the hot plastic around your rubber mold gun, and then you use either a small hydraulic press or a scissor jack or just clamps and smash that whole thing between a couple layers of foam and some boards. It was super analog and low tech. And then you cool it, and then you cut the excess off and sand your edges, and you have your holster. Holster makers started getting into vacuum forming. It began to percolate out into the small holster industry in 2013. And at that time, a few guys started building vacuum formers, and it was essentially a small table with a hinged lid and a thin silicone membrane. So you'd basically lay your mold gun down, put your hot plastic over it, close the lid, and then suck this balloon down over it to press the hot kydex into place. So we called it a membrane former. And that's widely used in like architectural vacuum forming, making like Corian curved shaped chairs and things. Membrane forming is its own niche within vacuum forming. And we started adopting that, and it worked really well, but it had some limitations. It wasn't super fast. If you had any sharp edges on your molds, you could pop the membrane, and then your press had to be taken apart and the membrane replaced. It was a pain. And so the Swift press was what I built for myself, which was a small, all-metal press that used the kydex itself as a self-sealing membrane. So it had an adjustable frame that you'd scale down to fit tightly around your mold. So you had to have a piece of plastic just slightly larger than your forming mold, so it would touch the table all the way around the four edges, and then you drop your frame over it, and it seals the edges of the table, and then the vacuum port under the mold draws the air down, the plastic forms to the mold, and then you cool it with a fan. So I made that for myself, and it worked really well. I could cool my parts much faster, changeovers were really easy, and there was no membrane to break. The trade-off was you used up a little bit more material per part to make because you couldn't get away with cheating the sizes of your stock as small as possible. It had to be a certain minimum size to work. And so I made that and I started posting about it on Instagram, and other holster makers were like, oh man, I want one. So I started making more of them and selling them, and it's been a consistent product of ours since then. But it always was kind of disruptive because it's a 15 by 20 inch, half-inch plate. And that's pretty close to the travel sizes on an S700. And so I always had to tear off my entire table setup in order to put those plates on and machine them, because I had to set them up basically dead center in Y so I could get an end mill around the outside perimeter of that 15-inch part.
Right, totally.
So if I was off from center in my travels at all, I would just get an error and I couldn't run the program. So I just recently figured out a way to turn it into use a Pearson vacuum system to hold the decks to make the vacuum table. And so I'm in the process of designing the fixture so that it basically is on risers and drops over my vices and my MPS and doesn't disrupt any of the existing table setup. It'll just have dowel pins that roughly locate in the table slot, so I'll be close to center. And then it just drops into place, bolts down, plug in the vacuum, drop my plates on top, and deck them off, and then drill them and tap them, and they should be done. So it's going to cut me down from 3 ops to 2, and it will leave all my other existing setups on the machine intact, which I'm really excited about because
Yeah, that's killer. I mean, that's a game changer as far as getting that product out.
tearing everything else off to make 25 or 30 of those Swift presses was worth it, but it was always a pain. And the further I got down the road of, I want to palletize everything so that all my setups just drop onto this pallet system, then having to tear the pallet base off the machine and then bring it in and very, very carefully realign it, square it up, indicate it, probe it, and then recover everything that was based off that. It was just stressful to do that. I didn't like doing it. And it would eat up a lot of my time to make sure it was just right, because having everything palletized a little bit wrong is like the worst of all possible worlds.
Right. Yeah. Making a whole bunch of bad parts real quick is.
Yeah. High density scrap holding.
Yeah, exactly. So let's jump back a little bit. So you said you don't model any of your holsters, but you do a lot of the trimming and stuff of your holsters in the machine. So how are you? Is that all sketch based in Inventor, or how are you actually doing your cam on that side?
It's all based off the molds. Some of it's sketched based, some of it is actually extruded and cut solids. But I have a workflow for. So I'll step back a second in the workflow. When you start with a firearm, there are 2 basic ways to arrive at a file that you can use to make a mold to create a holster. The first one is you can laser scan and then work backwards from there. And that's what I did when I very first started getting into CAD CAM for holster molds. I was like, okay, I need to have these guns laser scanned. And so I sent guns out and had them laser scanned. And what I found is I got back these atrociously large files that didn't have a single perfectly flat plane on them anywhere, because they were, super high resolution laser scans. It's just not, they were not clean. They were highly detailed, but they were very hard to adjust, and they were quirky, and they were not perfectly symmetrical because the guns are not perfectly symmetrical. And so I found that to be a real hassle to deal with. It'd be like, I always run into weird errors where I would try to mirror something to another side of the mold, and it would be like off by, fractions of a degree. And it was just always drove me crazy. So what I then did is changed over my entire workflow to getting the physical gun in hand and then modeling from scratch with calipers and radius gauges the entire thing from the start by myself, so that my model is very robust and very simple. It's all a series of interrelated extrusions, parametrically based, with defining work planes for my key datums. And it's very robust if I need to adjust it. If a new generation of the gun comes out and I find, I need to make this one part of the gun 30 thou taller, or this part needs to become wider, I'm not going back and trying to shift a Jenga piece at the bottom of this hugely complex leaning tower of Pisa. I'm going back to a clearly defined, well-labeled set of datum planes and extrusions at the base of the model and just adjusting them. I labeled them when I built them. I know what they are. They're in a logical order, and I can change them, and the whole thing updates, and it doesn't crash. Anytime I used to have to make updates early on in a model, if they were laser scan based, they always crashed. It drove me crazy.
I bet.
And so once I have that good file, this is where the iterative design part comes in, because I'm not trying to capture every detail. I'm looking for a simplified, regularized analog of the firearm. So there's a few key shapes: the overall width, thickness, and the trigger guard dimensions, which is where the holster usually locks onto the gun. Those have to be pretty accurately toleranced, but in a lot of other places, internal clearance is totally fine. You don't have to touch the gun on every surface. And oftentimes, the fewer surfaces you touch on to a point, the smoother the holster will feel. If it's touching everywhere, it gets kind of draggy. And so you want the gun to glide in and out of the holster, but you also don't want it to rattle around. And so figuring out how I like to work and where I like the holster to make contact and where I like it not to has been a gradual process of making lots and lots and lots of holster molds and figuring out where I need the contact to maintain that stability, to have the gun lock up and be secure, and where I can over tolerance to make sure I have good pass through clearance and I'm not going to snag or drag or rub. And that has sometimes meant that by virtue of those over tolerances that I've blundered into being future proof when a new generation came out. I'm like, oh, well, what do you know? They made it 20 thou thicker in this spot, and I already had 20 thou clearance there. Winner, winner, chicken dinner.
Okay, that's great. I had never really thought about it, but I guess it's like extruding the gun backwards along the draw to begin with, even because you've got to have all that clearance to go in and out. So
yeah, you can't have any captive shapes. Everything has to be extruded out to the mouth of the holster.
right. So do you shoot like USPSA or anything like that? Like, how are you?
I've done a little USPSA. I do go out and pay for some professional training classes each year. I've traveled around a little bit for that. There's the firearms and the holster industry is not one industry. Like the same way if somebody says, "Oh, I make car parts," like I make BMX parts. Like, well, even that is its own industry with little sub niche markets in it. And so within holster making and firearms owners in generally, you have military applications, you have law enforcement applications, you have private security and armed professionals applications, and those three are related, but they're all distinctly different. You have people who are carrying handguns for hunting, like you're out in Alaska or someplace elk hunting and you've got a rifle, but you also carry a handgun because you might run into a bear. That's a totally different thing from a narcotics officer in Philadelphia who's carrying a concealed weapon in plain clothes to do a drug bust. And so, what those individual users need, what they value, what kind of gun they're carrying, what kind of clothing they're wearing, all those things are widely divergent across all these little sub niches in the industry. And holster makers tend to specialize in one or two of those areas. Like, I don't make anything for hunters, and I don't make anything for the military. Most of my end users are in the law enforcement and armed professional slice of the market. They're typically men and women who are carrying all the time. They're carrying service grade handguns, so they're not carrying anything weird or antique or exotic. We don't make any revolver holsters. It's all modern, striker fired, mid to full size handguns that you would see in law enforcement and security applications. So that's who I market to. That's who my end users are, and that drives everything about the designs that we make is what does this kind of end user need? They need extremely good concealment, and it needs to be comfortable enough to wear all day for a job. It can't be, I got to pop it off and put it on and pop it off and put it on. It's got to be able to be put on in the morning and then worn for 10, 12, 14 hours straight and not cripple you.
Totally. Yeah, I guess the reason I asked is, if clearly this is what you're doing for a job. So do you have a subset of customers, good customers or people that you trust that you send holsters to be evaluated to make sure that, you're
Yes, I do.
okay.
I have a number of people who I reliably turn to if I want testing and evaluation on items. Some of those guys are law enforcement. Some of those guys are in private security, executive protection, the kinds of jobs where ex-military, ex-law enforcement guys will work in the private sector if they have the expertise and the skill to market themselves in that kind of business.
Right. Because I imagine with something like holsters where it's so feel based and personal that you really need a good review and you need somebody who will give you some honest feedback on stuff like that.
Yeah, there are also the mirror image of the holster industry. Is there's an entire industry of firearms training and education that exists in our country. And the most basic level that almost everybody has heard of is, the NRA has NRA trainers who teach very basic intro to handgun, intro to rifle, intro to concealed carry and personal protection kinds of classes. You'll find NRA certified trainers at a lot of larger regional gun stores, at a lot of larger ranges. They'll have somebody on staff who is an NRA certified trainer and is authorized to teach the NRA curriculum. The NRA curriculum is very, very entry level. It's designed for kind of a lowest common denominator, a person who's not really handled a handgun necessarily before. They don't have a lot of experience. It's the basics of understanding the parts, the anatomy of a handgun, how to safely load and unload it, and the basics of carrying it and shooting it.
Totally.
At the other end of that spectrum, in the training environment, there are very, very highly skilled and specialized trainers who have backgrounds in law enforcement, military, all kinds of other areas, who teach a lot of government classes, where they'll be closed to be law enforcement or .gov employees only. But they also tend to cross over to the civilian side. So guys like Craig Douglas, William Petty, Cecil Birch, John Johnston, if you're in the firearms world, those would be names you may have heard of if you run in the circles of people who carry a firearm for a living and want to spend their own time and money to learn how to operate that gun at a high level.
Right.
They're not hobbyists.
Right. Definitely. So
those guys, when they try out gear, they give you very, very relevant feedback.
Right. Oh yeah, I'm sure. I mean, that's what they do. That makes complete sense. So you had mentioned, what segment you target your advertising at. Like, I noticed you're very active on Instagram. Is that part of your advertising? Do you do targeted advertising outside of that? Is that just something because you're interested in it, or?
I like Instagram, and I'm on Instagram primarily because of the machining community on Instagram.
Okay.
There are a lot of holster makers on Instagram, but overwhelmingly, I got on Instagram and really started investing time and energy there because I was blown away by the quantity and the quality of machining information so in my mind, compared to Instagram, Practical Machinist is an absolute wasteland filled with cranky, unhelpful people who don't want to talk to me.
Completely.
And there is an unbelievable wealth of information on Practical Machinist, and the guys who are there know all the things that I don't know. And so, if there's a particular thing I'm looking for, I will go to Google, Practical Machinist. I'll site limit my search, and I'll look for a particular thing and then read some threads. I've been a member there for years. I never, ever post. And it's a reference. But on Instagram, if I have a question, I shoot a 15-second video and ask and say, hey guys, this is the problem I'm having. This is the weird thing that's happening when I run this line of code in MDI mode. Do any of you know why this is happening? Or is there anybody else you could tag who might know? And I get faster, more helpful responses every day of the week there than I would ever get on Practical Machinist. The trade-off is Instagram's not easily searchable. So oftentimes I'm like, man, where was that post about that guy who was using probing to detect 10 positions on a pallet, and then, if he only loaded 8 parts, it would only run 8 positions and would skip 9 and 10 if he didn't have stock there. Where was that post? And if you're like me, sometimes you save things, sometimes you don't, sometimes you comment so you can hope to find it more easily again later. But there have been many times that I've been browsing around on Instagram trying to find something that I vaguely remember that blew my mind when I saw it, and I can never find it again.
Yeah, no, I completely agree.
It's a trade-off. Like there's a lot of niche, interesting things on Instagram. Like I just watch 5-axis videos. Like Phil, his 5-axis Herco stuff boggles my mind. So the machinists who, like, before I bought my first machine, I talked to Kamal Alpay. I talked to Andrew at Frontline Fabrication, and I really wanted an Okuma, but I mean, they were huge and heavy and way overkill for what I needed. Like I didn't need a 560. it'd still be fun to have one someday, but I didn't need a 560, and I still don't,
Totally.
sadly.
Yeah. No, I'm kind of in the same boat. Like, we are incredibly happy with the brother we just purchased, but like, we've always looked at the 560 as kind of a, mid-level holy grail kind of thing.
Oh,
So
absolutely. And I the other machine that was on my short list of maybe someday was like a Kitamura My Center 300,
Mhm.
until Sam Passenger got one and has had a terrible time with his.
Yeah.
And just had lots and lots of problems. I'm like, oh man, like I was hanging out with Sam at IMTS and we were looking at that machine together and just drooling over it. And I went home to my brother's and he bought it, and it's been frustrating for him, which I'm,
Yeah.
sad to see.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Well, I mean, like, all the shop I started in had nothing but Kitamuras, and my first machine in my shop was a Kitamura, and like, seeing kind of the, I don't want to say the downfall of Kitamura, but like, nothing. I haven't heard fantastic things about any of their new machines, and it's really disheartening.
And then there was a whole range of machines that were above and beyond anything I'd heard about before. Like I didn't know anything about Grobe or Kern or any of those machine companies at all. I'd never heard of them until I was on Instagram, and then saw guys talking about highly specialized applications and these really cool machines, and then seeing the things they were doing and going, whoa. Like the first time I tried to sit down and figure out what the difference was between like an MX330 and a MAM 72, I'm like, oh man, Matsura's got amazing stuff. I want a Matsura. Like I knew Yamazin sold Matsura. I'd seen Matsuras when I went to look at my brother, but I'm like, yeah, whatever that is, it's not for me. I don't know what that big blue thing is, whatever that is. And now I desperately want a MAM 72. I have no use for one. It'd be totally ridiculous.
Yeah, you'd have to be
You know.
making thousands of new molds every.
Well, I mean, yeah, my cycle times, everything we make, almost everything we make, when we're making molds, it's not uncommon to have cycle times that are like 35, 40 minutes for a mold.
Right.
But that's as long as anything we ever make. Like nothing we make goes longer than that.
Totally. Yeah.
And so a year or two ago, I'm like, I should figure out how to do some lights out machining. I should figure out how to do, broken tool detection and in cycle probing, and then get some lights out machining going. And then I stopped and was like, what the heck am I going to lights out machine?
Right. Yeah. You'd
Like
add like
I could fill my
your
entire
cycles.
table with parts and it would take my lights out cycle time from 1.5 minutes to 9 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
And then be done.
Yeah. You'd turn off
It's
the
like,
lights
okay.
up and get home, and then it'd be done. And you're like, oh well.
And so I toyed around with the idea of like trying to make up random products or get into other niche fields just to have something that I could machine lights out. But that's a bad way to go about designing products and getting into stuff. Like I have no interest in being a job shop. I've never wanted to be a job shop, and the few times I've been asked to do stuff or quote things that were just completely out of left field, unrelated to anything else that I normally do, I don't enjoy it. I'm not good at it. It's not my expertise. I'm not really a prototyping machinist in that sense. I can barely read a print, at least in terms of reading it and confidently knowing, like, yes, I gathered all the relevant information off this print. Like in my world, all that exists are solid models. Like making things to print for me in holster world isn't a thing.
Right.
And making the transition into a world where, oh, the print is the thing. I'm like, okay, well, I don't have a CMM, so let me grab my calipers.
Right.
That's not, it's just a completely different world that I live in. It's fascinating. And if I could be in somebody else's shop where they already had the breadth of experience to watch over my shoulder and tell me when I'm doing something stupid, then I would love to learn that stuff. But the idea of trying to get into that field and teach myself all that stuff, it just doesn't interest me.
Totally. Well, and your machine time is taken up with actually making money on things that you're really good at. So it's not like you're losing out, I don't think.
Like, do you remember when spinners were really big?
Yeah.
Like, it was a
Yeah.
huge thing. 2017, 18, like fidget spinners. Everybody was making fidget spinners. Everybody and their brother who had a mill was making fidget spinners. And a friend of mine who had a holster company got into making high-end fidget spinners, and he actually closed down his holster company because he was making so many fidget spinners that he had to buy a lathe and dedicate all his available vertical machining center time just to making fidget spinner parts. And I'm like, maybe I should make fidget spinners. Maybe that could be my nighttime lights out product. And then I thought, no, I don't care about fidget spinners. And I'm a fidgety person. Like, I'm a real high energy, don't stand still, fidgety, bouncing around, walking around, moving fast kind of person. And fidget spinners did nothing for me personally in the idea of trying to get into this other thing just for the sake of having something to make was so opposite to how I think about what I want to do in my shop that I made a few fidget spinner prototypes and then I went, what am I doing? This is all wrong for me. It's great for somebody else. It was great for my friend Rick. He made a killing. He made a great business out of it. But it was totally not for me.
Totally. Yeah. No,
So I still click pens. I don't have a fidget spinner. I just click my pen.
Totally. So as we kind of wind down, I had a few questions that popped up looking through your Instagram that are not machining related, but I thought were kind of interesting. Well, one actually I think is kind of business related and less the business in general. So like I noticed that you do, I think, jujitsu, correct?
Yes.
So do you find that like having something like that, like I know I go to the gym pretty religiously just to have energy and focus to run a business, working long hours and things like that. I feel like if I didn't have something to keep me active, that, I'd lose my mind. Do you find that really helps you kind of work the long hours and grind real hard?
It really does. It really does. So I started doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It'll be 2 years ago in March. So I'm a total novice. I'm like the low man on the totem pole, white belt who goes and just gets smeared into the mats every time I go. But I'm getting smeared less quickly than I used to. And I'm not running out of cardio and getting like dry heave overexerted as easily as I used to. So there's definitely progress happening. But like a 90-minute class, or an open mat where I'm just out there rolling with other students, that's about the only time in my entire week when I have a chunk of time where I'm not thinking about my business. If I'm not asleep, I'm thinking about my business. At least in the back of my mind, things are all running in the background. And I've been struggling recently trying to figure out a way to, I've been reading Paul Allen's book, Getting Things Done, and trying to actually build a habit of just keeping note cards in my pocket and writing things down and getting them out of my head, because there's just so much stuff to think about. There's products and warranty and shipping and website updates and programming and work holding and everything, all the things. And they're just running in the background. And I find when I go to jiu-jitsu, it's all that side, and for an hour and a half, all I'm thinking about is don't get choked unconscious. And that's such a refreshing change of pace that if I didn't have it, I think I would go crazy.
Yeah, I'm right there with you.
I highly recommend it. If you've never tried Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it is super humbling and incredibly fun. It's low impact most of the time because there's no striking, but it is what we call competitive non-consensual in the sense that you go out there and it's consensual and you're not trying to hurt each other, but you're going 100% against somebody else. You're trying to submit them and they're trying to submit you. And that is a really interesting thing. When I've done workouts, it's almost all, I was always more of a biker runner, not a weightlifter. And it's easy to be like, oh man, I'm just not feeling it today. I'm not going to push the pace too hard. I'll run my 3 miles, but I'm not going to kill myself. But in jiu-jitsu, if you decide to say, oh, I'm not going to kill myself today, the other guy's like, well, great, makes it easier for me to kill you. And so there's a sense in which you don't, as long as you're out on the mat, the other guy has a say too, and so it's going to be lively. And that's really fun. And you meet great people, and then you get to try to kill them.
Yeah, I've got a good friend that does a bunch of different martial arts and has been trying to get me to go for a while. I think once I have a little more time, maybe go full time at my shop, I might start doing that a little more.
BJJ is super fun. I've been wanting to do it for years, and I kept putting it off and kept putting it off and kept putting it off. And then one day I was just in my shop working, and I stopped and said, you know what? I'm finding a gym today. I'm going to drive somewhere and go to a jiu-jitsu gym today. This needs to happen today. And so I found a gym and drove there that evening and met some cool people and had my first class and loved it. And have been going there ever since. But I just got a wild hair. One day it's like, I'm doing this. This is happening right now, today. Otherwise, I would never have done it. It was just one of those, one day that switch flipped and I had to go do it.
That's awesome. That is really cool. So the other, probably a good maybe ending note that I saw less recently, but kind of scattered throughout your Instagram was lots and lots of hot peppers. Like I'm a big hot
Yes.
pepper fan as well. Let's chat for a quick sec about peppers, why you eat them, what do you get from them?
So I have the opposite of a sweet tooth. I'm really not a candy guy. I don't like sugary stuff. I've always been I really gravitate toward things that are like salty and umami. I love olives and pickles and sharp cheese, like really pungent flavors. And when I discovered habaneros, it was like, I think the first time I ate a habanero was just after college, and a friend of mine gave it to me, and it was a revelation. Like I started sweating and my eyes got big and I was all flushed, and then like my heart rate picked up and I just felt like I was flying. It was amazing. And I found I really liked the different flavors, although, I'm not a big fan of jalapenos. Those don't do a lot for me. So I got into habaneros and then got into ultra hots. So like 7 Pots, Trinidad Scorpions, Carolina Reapers, Dorset Nagas, Boot Jalokias, a lot of the ghost chili varieties. And it turns out that in my backyard, 10 minutes from me, is the chili woman, Susan, I forget her last name, but she has a large greenhouse and has hundreds of varieties of peppers, and she ships all over the country. So she's at our local farmers market with a booth that is just all hot pepper starts all spring. And so every year I go and I usually try to pick out 5 or 6 kinds of hot to ultra hot peppers that I've never tried before. And then usually each year I try to recycle 1 or 2 that I know I like, and then grow peppers and eat peppers. I don't make salsas or sauces. I just eat raw peppers.
Well, that is pretty cool, or pretty hot, I guess.
I just like the sweat. That's why I'm bald. All the heat from the peppers just burned all my hair off.
Yeah.
What do you get out of them?
I don't know that I just have always enjoyed spicy foods. Maybe it is that same capsaicin high that people talk about. It's just always been fun, and like I just enjoy the peppers flavors, like up to a point.
Yeah.
But like I've always been given hot sauces and things like that for Christmas and birthday gifts from family members and friends that know me, and I've just always really enjoyed them. So I've been trying to grow Trinidad Scorpions for a while, but for some reason I think the seeds that I got either were incorrect or I've got a plant that's been growing for 2 years with no flowers. So
wow, that's not good.
Yeah. No, it's frustrating. I'm probably just going to start some new ones, but yeah, I was going back through your feed and I was like, oh man, I've tried that. I've tried that. Like, dude, these are.
My wife does not like spicy stuff, and it drives her crazy when I come to the table to have dinner or lunch with the family, and I've brought along some fresh peppers, because as soon as I start eating peppers, I stop having conversations. I'll just sit at the table and eat my food and eat my peppers, and I just sit there because I can't talk. And I'm having a great time. But my wife's like, "You're at dinner, honey. You should talk to the kids." I'm like, I can't. I literally can't. I just can't.
Yeah, it's a little tough for sure.
So we've had to find a way to moderate that. So I don't. I've not been eating as many peppers this past year. I didn't grow any this past summer. I didn't have time. But yeah, that is always fun. Sauces have always been kind of hit and miss. A lot of sauces, I'm just like, too much garlic. I just want the peppers. I like sauces that are almost always really simple, just fresh peppers, vinegar, and some salt. Those are really, really good. Those kind of homemade basic sauces, man, those really float my boat. Add some of that to some salsa, put it on eggs, put it on a sandwich, put it on whatever. I'm all about it.
Well, I don't know if you've tasted the Last Dab from the Hot Ones YouTube channel.
I watch that show sometimes. I've never tasted the Last Dab sauce. Have you had it? Do you like it?
I've got a half a bottle left in my fridge. It is incredibly spicy, but it actually is a really good taste too, which makes it tough because you can't eat that much of it.
That show cracks me up. It's so brilliant. What a great idea. Get a bunch of people on camera and then just totally take down their normal defenses and then ask them questions and see what they say. And the answers they get are often astonishingly candid.
Oh yeah. Well, it's like you said,
the person's just thinking, they're thinking, I'm dying. I better just say this before I die. I want the world to know.
Well, maybe me and Payton ought to start sending our guests some hot peppers before we have them on.
I would be down for that, but I suspect that most of your other guests would not.
I think you're probably right on the money with that. Well, I think Peyton's having some audio issues, so he's been kind of in and out here.
I was going to say, I feel like I've talked BrickTactical into the dark. Is he just...
Yeah, he's been trying to get it to work, but occasionally...
I'm here. I just don't want to screw things up on the end of it.
I actually had a couple of really quick questions for you about the whole Lego machining and thing. So you outsource your injection molding, but you make all the molds in-house?
No, I do all the molding in-house.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I do everything from mold design to make the molds to make the parts.
What's the material?
For...
like a Lego body, what family of plastics is that normally made out of?
All Lego stuff is all ABS.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've got 4 kids, and my boys, the 3 younger ones, are all deeply into Legos right now. And I was deeply into Legos when I was a kid, but I find my kids' approach to Legos is the opposite of mine. I was a set builder, and my kids are a dump everything together and make things. And that's just so different than how I did it, that it's like, I don't even know what to do here. Like, are you really going to take that apart and just intermix it? Really? But they love it. And, nowadays when there's all the specialty Star Wars stuff and all the things that we didn't have when I was a kid, it's like, oh, you guys have it so easy. You can build a TIE fighter. Like a real TIE fighter. I was like building pirate ships.
Yeah, I'm working on some Lego scaled Brothers and Haas machines.
Nice.
So I know a lot of people are going to like
that. That
those.
is super fun. So we've talked a lot about me. What are the things you guys like the most about your brothers?
So far, pretty much everything. Like, it coming from older machinery that we've had, it's just night and day as far as being able to load programs into it fast, run stuff faster, better, more accurate. I'm just in love right now. I mean, it's still definitely the honeymoon phase, but like, it's so nice. It's more powerful than our other machines. Like I said, faster. Having probing and tool setting now makes job shop work just that much quicker and easier. So
do you guys still have the Kitamura, or are you selling it, or did you sell it?
We are selling it.
I think I remember hearing on one of the other episodes about you getting it ready to sell, but did it sell?
We haven't even listed it yet. We need to get 2 of the windows recut and replaced. And so we've just been kind of dragging our heel. Well, we haven't been dragging our heels. We've been so busy that I have no time. I don't have any bandwidth to really get it ready and clean it up.
Yeah. So how do you guys carve out more bandwidth?
Well, the brother's certainly helping that. Everything that I've run on it so far, anything that's been repeat jobs has been 50% or less time than the last time I ran it and set it up.
That is awesome.
Yeah, I've been able to go home earlier at night and feel more confident that I'm going to get jobs done and on time and all that. So that's been incredible, really incredible.
Highest RPM you've tapped at so far?
I actually have done 0 tapping in the Brother yet,
Oh!
surprisingly.
What? I didn't even know that, Dylan.
Yeah, I don't even have my tap holder set up in it yet, my rigid tap holder. Yeah, we haven't had to tap any. All the parts that have gone in there have had 0 tapped holes in it. I've got one going in this week though that has some tiny little M1.2 threads, or
Ooh.
I think yeah. So little itty bitty ones. We'll see how brave I'm feeling when I put that thing in there, but
go for it.
I've
6,000 RPM right out of the gate. Don't do that.
Yeah. No. But no, I've never been too gun shy about the taps. Like in the kitty, we've tapped it, 2,000-3,000 RPM. So I'm not super worried about it.
The first time I had a part that had any decent number of tapped holes in it, and I was like, oh, I'm running at 1,000 RPM. It's going smooth. Let's repost that and go 2,500. Well, that's smooth. Let's repost that and go 3,500. Okay, that's fast enough. Let's not go any further. It's like it looks like it can't possibly have gone in, stopped, reversed, and come out. Like I must have just ripped everything out of that hole. Like there's no way. And all of a sudden,
right? And
the cycle's finished, of course, and you pull the part out, and like, nope, it's there. Crazy.
Yeah, that's insane. I've heard that it's the way that Brother does their coupling. Like they couple. I can't remember which one. I want to say that Brother couples their servo motor to the spindle, whereas other manufacturers couple the spindle to the servo driver. Maybe it's the other way around, but it's what makes their threading so accurate and quick.
The 99 tool limit on the library. Have you guys run into that at all yet?
99 tool limit?
So, unless I'm misunderstanding something, like I have a couple of generic drill tool numbers that I change drill sizes out in interchangeably because I've got all my plastic tools and all my aluminum tools. And between those two, plus a handful of common drill sizes, I've got 99 tools, plus a few AB tool specials for other things. And the Brother only runs up to 99 tool slots in memory.
Oh, you're talking about in ATC, yeah. No, I don't think we'll ever hit that because I've got maybe 5 or 6 tools that will stay set up in the mill, and then everything else just gets changed out as needed.
So do you?
I guess that's the difference between job shop.
Do you duplicate tool numbers across different types of tools?
Well, like every time I program a new part, tool 1 through I think 8 is where I stop. Are my standard aluminum cutting tools, and then everything past there just gets renamed every single time I program.
Interesting.
Like, yeah, so like my number 1 drill for a quarter 20 form tap might be tool 11 this time, and next time be 20, and next time be 18. It just kind of depends on where it is in my programming cycle and when it comes up in programming. I usually just pull them out of my tool library and then rename them as needed.
That's interesting. That's very different from how I do it.
Yeah, because it's nothing. I don't have enough tool holders to where I could keep every single, because I use probably 50 or 60 different drills and 20 or 30 different taps, and I wouldn't have both the money or the space to like load up every single tool that we use on a regular basis on all these different job shop jobs.
Yeah, I definitely don't load up all the tools. I don't have that many holders, but like in Inventor, in my tool library, I number a tool once and then I don't double it up. So like tool 49 is always a certain specific drill. No matter what program I use that drill in, it's that, that .150 drill is tool 49 anywhere it shows up in any program I ever use.
Oh, see, I've heard of people doing that, but I've just never, like, I would say, I don't know, 40 or 50% of the tools I pull into jobs, I'm just pulling out of the sample library anyway. I don't even have in my tool library most of the drills and taps because I just, like I said, I don't know. I don't even know where they're going to sit. So If unless there's anything special about them that like I've bought a specific tool for, like a specific length carbide drill with 3 flutes or something like that, like then I would maybe put that in my tool library. But for the most part, it's just I have my 1 through 8 that are my standard. It goes from face mill through a couple chamfers down through all my sizes of end mills that I use all the time, and then everything else is just open for whatever the job calls for.
That's really interesting. I never use the sample libraries for anything.
Yeah, no, I use them constantly, especially for taps, because I don't know. I find it easier, I guess, to look at my library when there's only 30 tools in it, rather than if I had to add all the drills and taps that I use, it would just be an endless list, and I'd have to start. Like right now, I don't have to filter at all. I can click on my library and all the tools I can see in one window pane.
Gotcha. Yeah, I've got 99 tools in my library, and everything I work from is based from there. But
I can definitely see the benefits of that though, because anytime you see, like for me, if I see tool 12 in a program, it means nothing to me. Whereas anytime you see tool 12, it is X tool every single time, which I imagine is pretty nice.
With the limited number of holders we do have, I've got a cart for additional holders that are outside either of the two machines, and everything on the holder gets tagged with its tool number, so that if I need to go find tool 26, it's on the cart, it's labeled. If it's currently in a holder, it's labeled with a length, so I can pull it, throw it in the machine, quick look at the tool list, and verify that length number is still valid. If I'm feeling OCD that day, I'll touch it off again anyway. But only one of our 2 mills has a tool setter, and so everything is touched off in mill 1, and some then are then taken to mill 2 and installed, and their tool lengths are added manually. And so I do all my tool setup in mill 1 mill, which is a little backwards. I actually just bought a second Bloom Z Nano probe so I can put it in the second mill and have my employee be able to touch off all his plastic cutting tools without me having to interrupt whatever mold I'm working on or wait until it's done. But yeah, that's how I've always thought of my tools. And that's just how I happened to think of it, because that was what occurred to me first. And realizing how many different ways different people organize their stuff. Like, I know some people actually organize their stuff in series where anything in the 80s range is this, anything in the 60s range is this. And I don't do that at all. Mine's a completely random hodgepodge of 99 tools as I've gradually acquired them.
Right. Yeah, as you needed them.
So like,
you added one.
Tools 1 to 5 are standard. Everything else, no order at all.
That's pretty interesting. Yeah, I had never even thought of doing that and using the ATC page to register a new tool number for a different pocket. Because like my pockets will always match my tool numbers.
Really? Yeah. That's so satisfying. Mine never do.
So I never have to worry.
Tool 1 is always in pot 1. Nothing else is ever anywhere that lines up.
Oh, okay. That's really interesting. I like I said, I could definitely see the benefits of that as well, though. Like
And do you order your tools per how they'll run in the actual job?
Drills and taps I usually do, but like I said, like my 1 through 8 is my standard end mills and face mills and chamfers, and they're just decreasing in size more or less. So like tool 1's my face mill, then it's my 3/8 chamfer, then it's, well, we haven't quite decided how we want it in the brother, but right now it's my 3/8 rougher, 3/8 finisher, 1/4 inch, 3/16, 1/16, and I think that takes me to 8. And I know that like tool 8 is always going to be a 1/16, and it's 90% of the time going to be set up, and it's my standard length one that I use. And so like when I'm programming, I know I can just pull that one in, and I know that it'll reach whatever I need to.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. And if it works for the kind of work you, that's totally awesome.
Yeah, I think that's mainly the thing, is like, because I'm doing prototype work, I know that those 8 tools will take me through 80% of the job, and the rest is just drills and taps. So it makes it easy.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I've really enjoyed talking at you. I feel like I've really been going a mile a minute.
No, we appreciate it. Like I don't want to talk over you, and I think we both, Peyton and I, enjoy just having a platform where people can come on and kind of just geek out on what they do. We
Yeah,
really
talk about
appreciate that.
yourself.
Yeah.
Well, I really do enjoy the work that I get to do, and I get to meet a lot of interesting people, and stuff that I've made has ended up in all kinds of fun places. One of the more humorous things, though, is because I OEM for several other brands that are better known than my brand. More than once, on Facebook or on forums, I've seen people saying, what's a good holster for this or that setup? And some person will recommend this one company where I actually make that holster. And then someone else will say, no, 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 get this one from this other company. It has this feature. And I also make that other holster. And so it's been kind of funny. I just started doing a little bit of paid advertising this fall. Prior to that, Instagram and Facebook Live videos were the only thing I ever did. There was no paid advertising.
That's awesome.
And I had a guy get on one of my Facebook ads, and he's like, who are you? I've never heard of you, so and so. You must, you sound like a new company. I only trust holsters from, and he listed off 4 companies. 3 of the 4 companies I do work for. And I'm like, hang on, let me tag one of the owners of one of those companies. Maybe he'll come over here and comment. And
That's
so
fantastic.
that I had a very, very good laugh over, but it also made me think very soberly, man, I've done an atrocious job of branding.
Well, I mean, like you said, you're the man behind other brands, so that it makes sense that they wouldn't know you right off the bat.
Yeah, part of the goal in 2020 is to, on a week by week, month by month basis, dedicate more time, energy, and money toward doing things that raise the profile of my brand, because we have our own unique products and they're not exactly the same as anything else we make for anybody else, because they have just the features that I value most. And so I think it's a great product offering, and I'd love to tell more people about it. But I'm usually so busy making everybody else's stuff that I don't have as much time to get out there and beat the bushes and let people know.
Totally.
So,
Well, speaking of letting people know, before you leave, is there anything you want to plug? You've got a podcast, your Instagram. Let the people know where they should follow you and check you out.
if you're interested in seeing what we do in our shop, Instagram is hands down the best place. I do have a YouTube channel, and I post informational videos about the products, about some process stuff. I've gotten to be friends with Jay Pearson, so a regular thing that I try to do in Instagram is, and in my shop just every week, every day, is try to find little lean improvements, because I really enjoy the process of making things. I love finding ways to save energy, improve the quality, make it easier for my employees to make great parts, and for them to finish the end of the day not tired, not sore, not worn out and discouraged, but having been productive, made good parts all day, having been comfortable, enjoying having been in the shop, and ready to come back and do it again the next day. And so I love sharing the things that I've happened to figure out in my shop that have made life easier for us, because I've always benefited from seeing things like that in other people's shops. And when I see videos from Jay's shop or John Saunders or any of the dozens and dozens of other people who I follow and pay careful attention to, I'll often see, in just the course of them doing a short video about some other thing, I'll notice something in one of their videos and go, oh, that's a great idea. I've never thought to 3D print a hang hook like that for my washdown hose, so it's easier to reach when I'm standing in front of the machine. I should do that. Or like, it's just super fun for me. So Instagram is the place where I post most regularly. I do have a podcast. I launched it recently. It hasn't gotten really going yet because I'm running out of time to edit the audio that I've been recording. So hopefully in January I can sit down and get caught up and actually release the episodes that I've already recorded. But yeah, Instagram's where I spend most of my time. YouTube a little bit, and I would love to have more people check out what we do. It's super fun. It's niche. I know firearms are kind of a divisive issue. A lot of people aren't into them. That's totally cool. You do you. And I really value the ability to share my shop. There are some things that I can't show because I do OEM work sometimes under NDA, but I'm not making nuclear reactor parts. So I think you were sitting next to me at IMTS, and then we were talking with that guy who worked at Los Alamos. And I'm like, so what do you do? He's like, well, I work in a national laboratory. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Which one? He's like, well, I work at Los Alamos. I'm like, dude, that's amazing. Like what do you do there? And he's like, I can't tell you. I'm like, well, like, are you working on hardware? He's like, I can't tell you anything about it. And I'm just like, well, do you work with machines? Like, can you tell me anything? Because I'm fascinated. Like Tom Lipton, Ox Tools, I think at Berkeley National Lab, doing a lot of that, thermomagnet stuff. That stuff is bananas.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic to watch. Like I'm really glad that he at least includes some of it in his YouTube.
And the sciencey stuff that's involved in there, like I feel like I'm wandering around in Tony Stark's laboratory, and I'm just like not Tony Stark.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, what does this do? Oh, I don't even understand how that works. What units is that measured in? I don't even know what that means. It's totally cool. This controls the flow of particles to awesome. Looks great. The machine work is beautiful. This is a really impressive giant magnetic thing you've built, and I'm fascinated, and I'll watch the whole video. I have no idea what's going on with it, but it's super cool.
Well, again, thank you so much, Andrew. We really appreciate it. Everybody go check him out on Instagram, Henry Holsters, and your henryholsters.com as well if they want to check out your holsters.
Yep.
Great. Well, again, thanks so much. We'll be posting this probably, I think, Christmas Eve or Christmas Day.
Awesome.
So Merry Christmas to everybody, and have a great rest of your year.
Thanks, guys, for having me on. See you in 2020.
Awesome. We will see you guys in next week's episode.